This episode of The Charity Show is brought to you by The Good Studio, creating great content for good causes. Hello again, you're listening to The Charity Show, the podcast that lifts the lid on the real world of UK charities. No jargon, no glossy PR, just honest conversations with the people who actually make things happen. Each week, we dig into the realities of working in the sector, the challenges everyone's wrestling with, the ideas that are working, and the small breakthroughs that make a big difference. If you're enjoying the show, hit follow, leave us a 5-star rating, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Right then, here's what's coming up in episode 39.
Quite a bizarre week, actually, but also a very rewarding week, just from my role as handling all the celebrities that are associated with the brain tumour charity. We've gone from a national treasure to a knitted baguette.
20 years ago, almost to the day, I guess, J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, I'm sure many listeners will be familiar with, opened the newspapers, saw a picture of a young boy, 5-year-old boy, Asek his name was, in a cage in an Eastern European orphanage. And she was shocked and appalled by it and looked around to see who was doing something about tackling that issue about children in orphanages and often the awful situation they were in. And very little was being done. And so, long story short, she founded what became Lumos Foundation 20 years ago.
So this is the government taking action, essentially, and to advise people to be safe and to make sure that they donate through the appropriate channels and not to fall victim to scams. And I just think at this time of year, that's just awful, isn't it? And of course it happens. We know it happens. Scamming is something that happens all the time. But at Christmas, over this festive season, when charities are working so hard to do so much good and to raise those much needed funds, scammers take advantage, and it's shocking.
Welcome back to The Charity Show. I'm Piers.
And I'm Tim Bainan, and we're recording this on the Thursday, Piers, after Giving Tuesday. How was Giving Tuesday for you? Obviously, it's a massive day in the charity calendar, hot on the heels of Black Friday and everything. How was it for you and the Brain Tumour Charity?
A busy time, Tim. The Brain Tumour Charity ties in with the Big Give campaign, which features so many charities out there. It's the week-long campaign that begins on that Tuesday, on the 2nd of December until the 9th of December. They double any amounts given or pledged during that time to your cause and stuff. So we've been doing this for a few years now, and it found it very, very successful. So we build social media campaign around it, content around it, and then bang, it all goes launching on the Giving Tuesday. And so far, we've hit our target. We've hit this year's target of £149,000, which is just phenomenal and amazing. Shout out to all our, really, really good. But so many of the charities also take part as well. So it's a real kind of a concentrated fundraising frenzy, I think is probably the best way to describe that week. So busy but successful. That was
good. I'm pleased to hear that, because I must admit, it's my perception of Giving Tuesday, really, and this is only purely a personal take on it from looking around social and looking around LinkedIn and everything, it felt a bit quieter this year from a charity perspective. It didn't seem to me like there was as much activity on social and as many charities really sort of pushing it as maybe I've seen in previous years. I might be completely wrong. That's just my personal view on it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Outside of the kind of chatter that we see and the kind of activity we see outside of the Big Give campaign, which kind of dominates us, is that it was slightly quiet. It's in that weird, unfortunate sweet spot, isn't it? As you say, it's just after Black Friday, so people are thinking about Christmas. It's just before Christmas. It's in that kind of a limbo where people are obviously budgeting and planning, and so it's probably not on people's top priority. It's a very strange time of the year, I think, for charitable causes, which is, while the Christmas adverts and the Christmas campaigns come out, isn't it, to try and boost and maintain it.
Yeah, but look at doing a little bit of reading into it. December is a really important month in terms of giving, and as a nation, we are very generous throughout December, and especially historically on Giving Tuesday. So it's been good to, I'm sure that has continued again this year, but it's probably just worth stressing that obviously, it's not just a day in December; it's the whole month, which we as a nation are very generous, which is always good to see. So yeah, that's a positive, I think. But anyway, This is our last show, Piers, before talking to Christmas. This is our last show before Christmas. We're going to take a little bit of a break for a few weeks to recharge our batteries and enjoy. Well, I'll be enjoying mince pies. You'll be throwing them in the bin probably, because I know you don't like mince pies. But
I did it again the other day. I tried one, realised I don't like it. I try every year.
Why bother? Why would you try if you don't like them? Why? Why would you do that?
I feel like I'm missing out on something. And there's so many varieties as well. I thought, I'll try one that's got a little bit of something else in it. But nah, it's basically just a mince pie with a bit of fluff on it. It's not my thing.
So yeah, anyway, mince pies, presents, Christmas, we'll get all that out of the way. We'll have a bit of a break, allow you, our lovely listeners, to recharge your batteries and enjoy the festivities, however you might be enjoying them over the coming weeks. And then we'll be back for a whole another year of the charity show and all the exciting things that might bring, Piers, in 2026. Who knows? What are your thoughts? World domination 2026?
Absolutely.
What else have you been up to this week anyway? Christmas and big Tuesdays aside, what else have you been up to?
I've had quite a bizarre week actually, but also a very rewarding week, just from my role as handling all the celebrities that are associated with the brain tumour charity. We've gone from a national treasure to a knitted baguette. Now, the two things make absolute sense when I explain them, but under wraps for both of them. So under wraps with Peter Kay's announcement, obviously, a comedian who's going to tour again in 2026. And he made the announcement a few days back, or a week or so back now, where he was going to donate all the profits from this tour, this groundbreaking sellout tour that he's been undertaken already, but the last few dates have been announced for next year. He's going to donate these to 12 cancer charities. And it's just been an amazing, humbling experience. And we are so grateful to him and his team that the Brain Tumour Charity is nominated, along with 11 other charities. There's Teenage Cancer Trust in there. There's ovarian cancer in there, a long list that just can't remember off the tip of my tongue, but an amazing gesture, basically. So he's gone full pelt with promoting this all over the airwaves and with his ticket sales and no doubt the venues on the night as well. So yeah, a transformational amount of support from Peter Kay for us and for 11 of the charities. So that's been amazing. So that's the national treasure part of what's going on this week. And then we've had another one where Tom Daly, who's associated with the Brain Tumour Charity, sadly rather lost his dad, Rob, to a brain tumour when he was only very, very young and in his early stages of his career. And Tom's been a huge supporter of us. He's teamed up with Renault as part of his branding, as part of his post-diving brand and all the things that he's doing, embracing all his love of knitting and wool. You know, he's got the show out on the Sunday as well. And over in France, the launch of the Renault 5 electric car. This is such a convoluted story, but it's so bizarre. The call I took when the agency was describing this to me is just really bizarre. Basically, Tom is knitting a baguette and he's knitting a couple of croissants, and we're doing an online auction for these items because in the Renault car, there's a baguette holder, being very, very French and very stereotypical. So, you know, why not? They've given one to Tom. Tom is going to knit a baguette that fits into the car's baguette holder. So the long and short of it is we have a massive online auction for Tom Daly's knitted baguette, which is a headline I've had much fun writing over the week as well. So yeah, all in all, really busy, really celeb kind of success in terms of its support for the Brain Tumour Charity. So it's been humbling, it's been busy, it's been really hard to keep it all under wraps and not even tell the internal staff, all of the internal staff at the charity, only a few key members. So I've been sworn to secrecy with a little smaller team. So that's been good.
Wow.
The early Christmas presents all round.
I love that. My early career was spent as a motoring journalist, as you know. So that amuses me. The fact that a French car manufacturer is playing to its own stereotypes and
isn't it leaning into the stereotype? I mean, obviously, yes.
Who on earth needs a baguette holder in their car? That is ridiculous. That's crazy.
If you want the headlines, if you want the SEO, if you want the content for socials, then that sums it up in just one sentence, doesn't it, really?
That's crazy, isn't it? That's ridiculous. Anyway, love that story.
How about you, Tim?
Yeah, well, it's been a busy week for me as well. A frustrating one in some ways because I've had quite a few IT issues going on this week. My email's been playing up and all that kind of stuff. So again, I've talked about this before on the show. When you work for an organisation, you know, and you can just take your computer to IT, or they can log in remotely and do whatever magic they do, and they can sort it out for you. When you're freelance, you got to do it yourself. So what I did discover, and I'm sure hopefully anyone else listening who's freelancing in the same boat will back me up on this, is actually how good ChatGPT is as an IT support. It's a revolutionary. So I was completely lost and flumped as to how to do this. I have no idea how to change these settings to make my email work again. ChatGPT, if you prompt it correctly, will walk you through it step by step, and it absolutely worked a dream. So this is just a shout out to AI as a tool to help freelancers out there who are stuck when it comes to IT. You don't need an IT team, you just need ChatGPT. Worked for me. So that was a interesting discovery this week for me. Anyway, enough of the IT, enough of all that nonsense. Coming up, we've got a fascinating interview, Piers, with Howard Taylor, Chief Executive of J.K. Rowling's charity, the Lumos Foundation, which works to transform the lives of children in institutions across the world. And I think the thing that struck me most about this amazing interview we've got with Howard, I don't know about you, Piers, was actually how little I knew about this issue and what life is like for thousands of children in orphanages. Obviously, I was aware of some historical stories along these lines, but had no idea really of the depth and scale of the issue. So that was fascinating. It certainly made me realise that there are a lot of charities out there working to change the world and solve issues that many of us are ignorant of or blind to. So it's a fascinating insight. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely echo that. The statistics that Howard touches on as you go into the interview are quite shocking, and the scale of the problems that they are tackling are just immense. Yeah, absolutely eye-opening.
This week on the Charity Show, we're diving into an issue that rarely gets the attention it deserves, despite affecting millions of children around the world. We're joined by Howard Taylor, CEO of the Lumos Foundation, an organisation working to end the institutionalisation of children and to help families stay together. Howard has spent his career at the sharp end of global child protection, from the UK Diplomatic Service to the Nike Foundation, to major public-private partnerships tackling violence against children. And now, as J.K. Rowling's foundation marks its 20-year anniversary, he's leading the charity into its next chapter at a time of huge geopolitical and humanitarian upheaval. We talk about the scale of the problem, including why 80% of children in orphanages aren't actually orphans, the systems that keep these institutions in place, and what it really takes to shift the political, cultural, and financial barriers that stop children growing up in safe, loving families. It's a fascinating, wide-ranging conversation in two parts. So let's get into part one. Howard, welcome to the Charity Show. It's lovely to see you this afternoon. Thank you for being here. It's going to be great to chat a bit more about all that you do and the Lumos Foundation and the incredible work that you guys do. And tell us a little bit, first of all, about your extraordinary background, from global child protection work to leading Lumos. What drew you to this mission and this organisation in particular?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Tim and Piers, for having me on the show. It's great to be with you. My backstory began life in the diplomatic service, but what was then the UK Department for International Development. So working on international development issues, a whole bunch of roles in that organisation over 15 years or so, including spells in Africa and Asia. I then made what was perhaps a slightly less usual move across to the west coast of the US, and for a while I ran the Nike Foundation. One of the biggest initiatives of that foundation was something called the Girl Affair. We spanned it out to London. I went with that. And then, long story short, after that, I ended up back in the US, this time in New York, in a UN public-private partnership, which is focused on tackling violence against children. Moved back to the UK about a year or so ago. The opportunity at Lumos came up. So it was the timing was good, but the accidental career fit was also good. I wouldn't pretend that my career pathway has been some grand plan. I've just been fortunate to have opportunities that have come up at the right moment that I've been able to seize. So that's the backstory of why I'm at Lumos, and why the job really intrigued me. I had worked a bit with Lumos in other organizations, hadn't really tracked what they were up to in the last 5 or 6 years. And I was really looking for something where, there was a significant ambition from the organization and from the board about the next chapter for the organization, and that I had a skill set, networks, and experience that I could bring to bear, and it would be a win-win in that regard. And all of those things are definitely true at Lumos.
Sounds like the stars aligned, pretty much.
Yes,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just amazing story there, Howard. And also, Lumos Foundation is approaching 20th year anniversary in November, which is a huge milestone.
It is a huge milestone, and again, by accident, I've stumbled into an organisation which is at a special moment for that organisation, but also, and I dare say we'll come on to talk about this, at a moment for humanity where so much is in turmoil.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting to arrive almost exactly a year ago. You're right, Piers, that our 20th anniversary is this November, 2025. And arriving in an organization which, knowing its 20th anniversary was coming up, was anyway looking back to reflect, what have we learned? What does that mean for where we go next? And then, of course, in the course of this particular year, there's been maybe unprecedented turmoil in all sorts of ways, geopolitically, economically, foreign aid, donor, finance, everything is, in flux to some extent. And therefore, coming into an organization where we were anyway thinking about what do we know, what does it mean for where we are, and where do we go next? How do we maximize our contribution globally for children? And then doing that in an environment where everything around us is in flux, which of course comes with challenges, but I think also some significant opportunities.
Very much so. And I think it's really interesting how you pick on, the current climate, which is framing so much of what we do on these chapters that we highlight on the podcast, because everyone's going through this huge amount of flux, especially with a humanitarian angle to it as well. Just very, very quickly, for those who don't know the Lumos Foundation, could you give a snapshot of what it's about and its founder's story and how that mission has kind of evolved to the present day?
So 20 years ago, almost to the day, I guess, J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, I'm sure many listeners will be familiar with, opened the newspapers, saw a picture of a young boy, 5-year-old boy, Vasek his name was, in a cage in an Eastern European orphanage. And she was shocked and appalled by it and looked around to see who was doing something about tackling that issue about children in orphanages and often the awful situation they were in. And very little was being done. And so, long story short, she founded what became Lumos Foundation 20 years ago. Fast forward 20 years to where we are today. And of course, like any organization, it's been a journey of learning, of impact, of ups and downs, inevitably that you'd expect along the way. And I think to crystallize where we've got to, there are still over 5 million children who live in institutions. Many of them are called orphanages, but 80% of the kids in those orphanages are not orphans. They have biological living parents. But we've also evolved to work more upstream because, of course, we focus still on that reuniting, that reintegration, if you like, of children from institutions with families or family-based care or alternative care, because all the evidence shows that's better for children. But we also focus on prevention because, of course, it's better if you can work more upstream and prevent the breakdown of family and the separation of children in the first place. And so over the years, that's taken us into over a dozen countries. We currently have a presence in 4 countries across 3 continents, but we have some exciting plans afoot for where we might go next.
That's a shocking statistic, Howard, that 80%. And people start realizing, the actual numbers involved here.
It is. The numbers are high, and it's interesting. I mean, there are various drivers of why children end up in institutions. And so, I can speak to those. But what's also interesting when we look at trying to work upstream and prevent the breakdown of families, prevent the separation of children in the first place, is not all the children who get separated from families end up in institutions. Some are on the move, some are in the street, some end up, affected by conflict, etc. So there are various drivers, but it's taken us into conversations and collaboration with communities working to tackle violence against children, disability, inclusive education, as well as poverty, caregiver support, etc., all the things you might expect that, we sometimes may in certain environments take for granted that may be around us, whether that's personally or in our community or structurally in the economy in which we live. But it's not the same for everyone. So yeah, the numbers are shocking. And that's why we still do what we do. There has been progress over the 20 years, but we do see that in this moment now of so much that's in flux, if this isn't a moment to really not revisit necessarily, but collectively, and I mean just beyond Lumos, if we, the community who work globally on this issue, if this isn't the moment to really think hard about what do we know that works and how does that translate into this new era that we're all heading into, what are we doing? And that's what we are doing. And that, I think, can have, a greater, faster impact for children over the next 10 years or so.
Howard, what those figures are shocking, as you rightly said. But when most people think of orphanage scandals, they might think back to the Romanian situation and the headlines that were made through that many years ago, and how shocking that was. that's probably as far as their knowledge or their awareness goes. Why do you think public awareness of this issue, given the numbers you've just quoted, why is public awareness so low?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tim. I think it's partly because it is simpler to think about, and many generous people, well-intentioned generous people, give money to support orphanages, which we should speak a bit about because it's part of also the supply and demand of the whole equation. There's a reason why that many countries have evolved away from orphanages. And yet in those countries, generous, well-intentioned, good-hearted donors still give money, whether that's £10 a month or institutions giving hundreds of thousands of pounds. It doesn't matter. And they may get, letters from those kids. They may get a photo every year of a smiling child standing in front of a freshly painted orphanage. And I'm saying that not to be cynical, but just to say I can see how it is easy to think that you must be helping that child if they are getting, clothed, schooled, fed, etc., in an institution called an orphanage. I was in Kenya in January. There are 902 orphanages in Kenya, almost all under the auspices or funded by the Catholic Church globally. And that's not pointing the finger at the Catholic Church. Other faith groups fund orphanages all over the world. The point is that well-intentioned Catholics all over the world are funding something which they believe to be in the best interest of the child. But I dare say those individual givers don't have the time, the capacity, the bandwidth necessary to get under the hood. Sorry, I lived in America for a while. Under the bonnet of what's really going on, and just stepping back for a moment and thinking, who would be aware that 80% of kids in orphanages have living parents? Who would be aware that even if they don't, we know that alternative care, foster, adoption, kinship care are all better for those children. And we know that particularly, not just from the data that shows us, we know it from the thousands, sadly, of stories of children who have come out of orphanages, come out of institutions, and realize what they missed. And some of the most powerful, heart-rending, but really compelling stories / testaments that I've heard as I've traveled around the world and spoken to young people with lived experience of institutions, and particularly those who were put in an institution for a few years, maybe came back to live with their biological family or kinship, their wider family, for example, and only then did they realize, oh my goodness, I thought I was okay because I was fed, I was at school, I was, clothed, etc., but not realizing that, being cared for by people who are paid to care for you is never as good as being brought up in a safe and loving family environment. It just isn't, and it can't be. And that's the beginning of it. And I wouldn't say a thin end of a wedge, but you will also be familiar with, some orphanages are better than others in terms of the conditions that children are in. And, sadly, there is somewhat of an industry around some orphanages. And at the really sharp end, you get into issues around abuse, violence, and even trafficking of children as well.
It always sounds like something from 300 years ago, doesn't it? Does it living, alive in the modern day? There's something that you see in you hear from Dickens, but not from modern day. It's just, it seems ridiculous.
It does, and that's why, going back to the earlier conversation about why I joined Lumos a year ago, because I felt there was an opportunity to take Lumos' reputation, what it does well, and not just Lumos, as I said earlier, our partners as well, to really look back, to learn from what we all know works and see how we together can accelerate that over the coming years. Because, when you do talk to people as we're talking now, most people have the same response as you. It's like, really, it's that big a problem. So many children aren't actually orphans, so that's completely misleading. There are better ways to bring children up than being in institutions and orphanages, and there are ways to do that. There are ways to transform the systems around children, and happily, there are more and more governments, because it does take state support. It does take governments, whether that's federal government, central governments, or regional, local governments, to become involved, because the scale of this in certain countries, I mentioned Kenya, it's the same in many other countries, means that you do need the state to be involved in actually transforming the systems around children and around families, as I said earlier, to prevent the separation of children in the first place.
As we're talking, Harold, or as you're talking, I can kind of see why, with someone with your pedigree and your background, was attracted to Lumos and the kind of complex nature of what you're saying. Because it's not just getting kids out of buildings, it's a culture, it's a societal, it's a political change or political pressure that needs to put on. The complexity of this seems huge. So you've mentioned it a little bit. Is the political aspect, or there are other actors that are really blocking the way these the whole process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Listeners may or may not be aware that earlier this year, David Lammy, now our Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, he was at the time Foreign Secretary, launched a global campaign on care reform. And that partly came out of his family experience, where they have adopted children, etc. But also, I think, from some of his own constituency experience, where the system had failed children quite spectacularly in his constituency as an MP. He was in New York, and in the margins of the UN General Assembly, launched a charter of care reform, which many partners, we were one of many organizations involved behind the scenes with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office on what should be in that charter. But the exciting thing about it, Piers, to your question about political interest as well as blockages, but 30 governments have signed up to that already. We are advocating for more to do so. So I share that as a glimmer of hope. Secondly, that there are solutions. And actually, when you really get down into the detail, you very quickly realize that it also makes economic sense as well. So it's not just the right thing to do from the perspective of the child and their development and their growth into adulthood, etc. It's also possible, and it's a smart investment to make. Now, on the blockages, I think that's a really good question. And I think, honestly, I don't know that we know enough about where the blockages are beyond anecdotally. So what I mean by that is we know where the support is, we know where the champions are, whether that's in government, whether it's in local government, whether it's in the community. It can be faith groups, it can be NGOs, it can be international organizations. We know where the champions are. But when we think about the whole ecosystem, from the person in Europe sending £10 a month to support a child in an orphanage in Africa or Asia for argument's sake, through to that whole system, if you like, of that money, which is essentially propagating a system which we know is not the best system for children. But there are vested interests along the way in that system. There are jobs, there are people in those institutions who are employed. So I think that when you start thinking about, even if you don't know exactly where the blockage is or who the blockers might be, you can imagine the kind of blockages there might be. And therefore you have to think about, how do you address that as a system? How do you address the systemic issues? And that's why, I describe our work in different ways to different audiences. And for some people, I start with, we're in the business of, transforming care systems. And that's the whole system around a child, which means working with many partners, within and beyond government.
I'd like to pick up on that in terms of how you do challenge some of those issues, Howard. And looking at your website, one of the things that struck me is, obviously in some countries, orphanages are, as you've said, actually privately run, profit-making businesses that effectively recruit vulnerable children. Living in the West, that's a very hard thing to get your head around. It almost mind-blowing. How do you begin, or how does the third sector begin to take that on and to challenge that and to take on governments and to try and bring about that kind of change? Where do you start, and how do you work together? What partnerships do you need to bring together to make that happen?
Yeah, so we work with a range of partners, which I would summarize as sort of global, national, and local. I mean, globally, organizations such as UNICEF, Save the Children, partners like Hope and Homes for Children, Family for Every Child, etc. There are a cluster of organizations who either work specifically on children, and this area, this subsection, if you like, of child protection is something they care about and are involved in because they care about the whole child. And there's a very small number of organizations who focus more specifically on this particular set of issues. And so that's the sort of international partners. And then our model as Lumos is always to work in partnership with government. So in all the countries we work in and have worked in, we've never started work in a country without doing so in partnership with government. And we think that's really important because without government, without us working alongside government, you're not going to get the sustainability, you're not going to get the local ownership, you're not going to get the issue embedded into government budgets, which I'll come to in a moment. And therefore you won't get that sustainability, that longevity, and that opportunity to replicate and scale. And so our model is very much, and I don't want to make this all about Lumos, there's other great organizations working alongside us, but our model is very much catalyzing the political support and leadership that's needed. And we do that with our partners. And then working alongside governments to provide the support they need with some limited financing as well. And what you might conceive as a sort of pilot approach. So we would work over some years with a government, central government, local government, regional, if they're there to pilot something, demonstrate how it can work in that context, in the spirit of then the government having walked that journey alongside us, or maybe properly to say us walking alongside them, they can then replicate and scale that more broadly across the country. So that's very much the model of our approach as Lumos.
It's hugely complex work, Howard, listening to you talk there in terms of all the different cogs in the machine there that have all got to come together to make something happen over, I'm assuming, quite a substantial period of time. Given the scale of the issue that you already talked about, and the number of countries and the number of children affected, how on earth do you prioritise where you do focus your time and energies and resources?
That's a very timely question because, as you know, it's our 20th anniversary year. And as we all know, we're sitting in a time of significant change on any metric, and actually a lot of interdependencies between changes, which might be political, economic, aid sector, digital, cybersecurity, all of those things. And so we right now are looking at, what does the next chapter look like for Lumos? How can we maximize, accelerate our contribution to, support more children, both to stay in families and thrive in family environments, but also to do more in the next 10 years than we've done in the last 20 in terms of that reuniting children in institutions with families or family-based care. And so our team, who are very smart, way smarter than me, have developed a model. And into that model, you feed a whole bunch of data. I think it has 10 or 11 parameters. There are some data gaps and issues, which you'd expect in some of the countries. And that doesn't spit out an answer of which country you should go to next, but it gives you at least a starting point. So you can imagine some of the aspects of that consideration are, well, what is the situation of children in that particular country? Are there significant numbers of children in institutions, and or are there significant numbers of children at risk of separation from their family? And then you get to a whole bunch of factors which really speak to, is it a conducive environment? Is it an enabling environment to actually get this done? Is there the political commitment? Are some, what's the budget situation? What's the capacity of the social care, the social workforce? Some of those issues. So, having a sense of those things then starts to give you a sense of which countries you might have a reasonable chance at making some reasonable progress over a reasonable amount of time. There's lots of reasonables in there. But also another factor in there is thinking about our ecosystem. Is that, well, where is Lumos and where are some of our partner organizations? Let's not go to the same countries. We are, some of us, in the same countries now. I personally think that's quite inefficient. And so I think there are some efficiency gains that we could shake out of this current moment of turmoil and change, where as we go forward and we think about some new countries, new geographies where there is not yet that technical support or financial support for that transformation, let's not all rush to the same countries. Let's have a grown-up conversation, getting in a room together, which we're doing, which we're talking, and to our major partner organizations. So as we look forward, we're being a little bit smarter about, let's not all do this everywhere. Let's figure out who is best placed to do what in which countries.
It's just, what's occurred to me, Howard, as I'm listening to you, is just the depth and the complexity of the diplomacy that is involved with this. Because obviously you have a model for what you would like to do. So the Lumos Foundation has got, this is the way we're going to do it. But each country, each government, each society has a myriad of different complexities that one size will not fit all at all. That must be both an incredible challenge, but also incredibly difficult to kind of tread carefully when you're making those initial kind of assessments.
Yeah, that's right, actually. And one of the things when we, as I said earlier, we don't embark on work in any country without partnership with the government. So with their acknowledgement, with their agreement, with their collaboration as a cornerstone of how we work. And so there is even diplomacy before you even get going in terms of, the relationships you need to develop and the trust you need to build before the work can even begin. I think, and again, I've only been with Lumos a year, so pretty much everything good that Lumos has ever done, I've had no responsibility for. It's all been on watch of my predecessors and obviously the team who are still around. But one thing I have felt since I've been in Lumos is that we do have a good reputation globally, partly because the numbers are large when you get to them, but it's a somewhat niche issue in the broader set of issues affecting children globally. As I've explained, it does take us into a bunch of other issues affecting children, and we have to be careful that we don't try and be experts in everything, but we know enough to be smart collaborators with those who work on those issues. But Lumos has a good reputation internationally for what it does, because we've been doing this for 20 years, and we've gone to a bunch of countries. We've stayed long enough and partnered with governments to affect change. And then there's always a judgment, I think, about when is the right moment for us to move out of one country and move on somewhere else. When either momentum is irreversible or that transformation is nearly complete. And that bit of it, actually, that ending part of the transformation, as so often the case in all sorts of social impact issues, is often when you get to the hardest to reach category. So often that is when you get to issues around children with learning issues, with disability, etc. And Moldova, where we still are, we've been in the longest, almost all of the 20 years Lumos has been in existence. Moldova is very near, in numerical terms, the end of its childcare transformation. But the children who still are in institutions are there often because of disability. And so it's, we haven't gone because we want to work with the Moldovan authorities, and they give the privilege to do that, to crack that issue, because that will be an issue in other places. And so again, we're still learning as we go, even though we've been doing it for 20 years.
Incredible work being done by the Lumos Foundation, and it is just amazing how little coverage children in institutions gets in the news today. It's almost swept under the carpet. It's shocking, and it shocked myself and Tim when we started speaking with Howard. But talking of news, Tim, what have you got coming up this week?
Well, we've already talked a little bit about Giving Tuesday, Piers, already at the top of the show, which was on the 2nd of December. And I just wanted to pick up on a story that I saw that came actually from the Gov UK website, so straight from the government. And this is about the Charity Commission for England and Wales, the fundraising regulator, and City of London Police, encouraging people to give confidently to registered charities while taking simple steps to ensure that their donations reach their intended cause. I was reading directly from the article there. But the thing that shocked me most about this really is it's a simple article that gives you some advice and everything, and I'll talk through some of it in a second. But this is essentially as a direct result of the rise of charity scammers, people using Giving Tuesday as a chance to scam donors out of their money. So this is the government taking action, essentially, and to advise people to be safe and to make sure that they donate through the appropriate channels and not to fall victim to scams. And I just think at this time of year, that's just awful, isn't it? And of course it happens. We know it happens. Scamming is something that happens all the time. But at Christmas, over this festive season, when charities are working so hard to do so much good and to raise those much needed funds, scammers take advantage, and it's shocking. So let me read some of the advice that the government is available on the Gov UK website, and we'll put these links on the show notes as usual. It says that the regulators are encouraging the public to continue to give with confidence this festive season by following these simple steps for safer giving, and I'll rattle through these quite quickly. Check the charity's name and registration on the charity register, again, which is on the Gov UK websites. Most charities with an annual income of £5,000 or more must be registered. So just if you're not sure about whether or not the charity is actually real, check it on the register and find out for yourself. Make sure the charity is genuine before giving any financial information. Be careful when responding to emails or social media posts or clicking on links within them. Contact or find out more online about the charity you're seeking to donate to understand how they are spending their funds. Look out for the fundraising badge, the logo that says registered with fundraising regulator, and check the fundraising regulator's directory of organisations which have committed to fundraise in line with the code of fundraising practice. Never feel under pressure to donate immediately. Ask the collector, if you're talking to somebody on the street, for more information, and if in doubt, wait and make a donation directly at a time that suits you. Never donate under pressure. If after making these checks you think that a collection or appeal is not legitimate, visit Stop Think Fraud website to find where you can report charity fraud or other suspected types of fraud. So that all those points there, obviously aimed at the public and keeping them safe, make sure that they donate properly. But I think it's really important for our audience, for our listeners as well, for people at charities to also take note of that, and to perhaps put out through their comms channels at this time of year as well, just to remind people not to fall victim to scams at this time of year, and to donate through the appropriate channels directly to that charity. Because who knows, there could be people out there pretending to be you, pretending to be your organisation, and taking money from people who are wanting to give to you. So make sure that doesn't happen. Check out the website. We'll put the links in the show notes. So yeah, there you go. That's my news. What about you, Piers?
Yeah, that's a good call, that, because it is a very emotional time of year, isn't it? And people are moving fast. We're buying things fast. We're answering call. Everyone's rushing. Maybe not pay attention to it. And as you say, huge reputational risk potentially to organisations out there. So in the news this week, and I came across this just recently. Obviously, everyone's got their Christmas adverts coming out on the big screen. But if you're in Wales this December and you're at the big screen, in terms of the Cineworlds or the Odeon cinemas, you may get a glimpse into PETA, the animal rights and the animal welfare charity, very famous for its high profile and sometimes quite often actually shocking stunts out there. They've got a Christmas advert. So in glorious silver screen, you can maybe see their advert, which is going to highlight the amount of animals that are slaughtered in the UK over the Christmas season. They want to bring everyone down with it, but 180 million animals are slaughtered. So obviously you can kind of guess where this is going with what's PETA's analysis and PETA's drivers for this advert. It is quite the shock. It is quite the jarring thing to see. Very, very powerful. Possibly may upset a lot of people, but in terms of getting the message out there, it is a really, really striking advert, and not like any of the other adverts you've seen from any of the supermarkets out there. So that's going to be shown across a lot of cinemas in Wales in December. It has got a 15 rating, so obviously, you will be prepared for it. But it's an interesting piece of comms, an interesting piece of marketing, and it does what it needs to do. It does what it says on the tin. So, whether you agree or disagree, the new PETA Christmas advert is one that will stick in your mind.
I've not seen it. It sounds shocking. I might go and Google it in a minute and take a look. But I think that also opens up an interesting debate. If you go to the cinema to be entertained and you see that, even if it's you're in a 15 or an 18 film or whatever, and so you are within the age range for that, you haven't chosen to see that, and if it is that shocking, could that actually inadvertently go against the charity? Because it's kind of
That's a really interesting point, Tim.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this since I saw it and shown it to the people in our charity as well, and to get their views on it. And they all agree, yeah, in terms of what it needs to do, it does it. But you're absolutely right. You will not be expecting possibly to see it. And it could actually, it could have a backlash. But if we're honest, PETA has a kind of long history of having a lot of backlash. So it's well equipped and well versed in dealing with backlashes against it. But then it remains, so high profile because of these sort of not stunt undermines what it is, but these sort of campaigns that it backs. So, but yeah, it will be interesting to see.
I'll be keen to see what the how that goes down with audiences. Whether or not the cinemas receive any complaints off the back of it as well. Be interesting, really interesting.
Yeah,
but yeah,
very true.
Yeah, we'll put the link to it in the show notes so people can choose if they want to look at it or not.
In the second half of our chat with Howard Taylor, we dig into the complexity behind care reform, from the political blockers to the role of faith groups, donors and volunteers, and how Lumos decides where it can make the biggest difference next. We also talk, obviously, about J.K. Rowling's role as founder and the realities of leading a charity in a fast-changing world. Let's pick it back up.
20-year milestone is a really important one, and looking at your websites, your founder, who you mentioned at the top of the interview, talks about setting up the foundation in the first place. How involved is she on a day-to-day basis, can I ask? Do you have to keep her abreast of what's going on?
Yes, we do. She's not involved at all on a day-to-day basis, so she has no executive, no governance, no strategic role. I would say she's a generous donor. She is a thought partner, and we benefit a lot through her social media reach. She's happy to sort of push things out on her channels for us, which gets us to a much wider constituency globally than we would otherwise able to get to. We also, through her, have access, which I have now come to call the Harry Potter ecosystem, which is a lot of corporations globally who work in that ecosystem, and very interesting conversations with them. And again, when you think about some of the shifts going on governmentally, when you think about what's going on in the corporate space, the digital space, etc., and just exploring, what are the opportunities? How can we work with some of those organizations? They have a clear corporate agenda, and that's right and proper. But, where are those win-wins? And I had some experience of that when I was working, at Nike, where you're, running a foundation of a major global corporate and looking at where are those win-wins to be had. So, I would say ultimately Jo is a huge asset to Lumos. And, generous with her time, generous with her thoughts. I've had the privilege actually over my career to work with people who you might call celebrities or ultra high net worth individuals, etc., however you might classify them, in different roles. And, I've been very impressed since the first time I spoke to Jo and subsequent conversations for someone who started this 20 years ago, just how much she still cares, just how much she sees, like we're 20 years in, but the work is not done. And just how much she knows and understands and follows, way beyond what I've ever told her or we've told her. So I know she's absorbing from other sources to understand what's going on in the world in which we inhabit, what's going on in the philanthropic space, in the development space, and in the countries in which we work.
Sure. Can I ask you as well? Obviously, you mentioned she's got a hugely influential. She has a huge following on social. Anything she says gets picked up by the press inevitably, and some of the things that some of her views have been picked up by the press and may have cast a spotlight on the foundation that maybe you might not have asked for. How do you, as CEO, cope with that? And how do you make sure that the focus stays on the work of the foundation and ultimately the children you're supporting?
Yeah, great question. I think I'll start by saying that, recognizing that, yes, Jo holds some strong views, and she fights for causes she believes in, and people may agree, they may disagree with what she says, what she thinks, but what unites us, so Jo, not just Jo and me, but Jo and Lumos, is the commitment to Lumos vision and mission. And all of our work with her is focused on delivering Lumos vision and mission. And then I think over time, I think there has been some impact. I think particularly, I've been told that, there has been impact historically around maybe some of the fundraising and around people who may at one time have given, have maybe paused or reduced, etc. But it's quite interesting. And again, I've only been at this for a year. What's been interesting to me is both how, different constituencies and different potential partners, donors hold quite different views. And it's not static. And it's interesting also, talking to you in the UK from a UK charity perspective, even internally as an organization, this I think has been an issue, historically for Lumos as an organization. And I think Lumos, prior to my joining, had to work through some of these issues about, how it felt and what its own approach to some of these things were as an organization, as separate from what our founder or anyone else whom we're involved with might do or say. Yet, for some of our country teams, this isn't an issue for them. And occasionally, when we've discussed this as a team, I get the sense some of them are thinking, why are we even discussing this? We have more important things to talk about. So it's quite interesting. As I go from the US to the UK to Africa to other parts of Europe, we always have to remember that sometimes we can take an overly UK or overly northern-centric view of things, and that isn't necessarily held by very large numbers of people in other parts of the world.
That's really interesting how it's what you said about it not being static. I think it's really interesting. Over at the Brain Tumor Charity, we have a few high-profile celebrities, high-worth individuals, huge media presence, and it is a constantly changing thing, but undoubtedly, I think for so many organizations, for Lumos Foundation as well, it has a potential to open doors, to bring another angle where then people get involved in your mission and what you're doing, via the power of celebrity. It's kind of managing that, I guess, isn't it, as you go on?
I think that's exactly right. And we had, I don't know if you saw, a few months ago, we did a prize draw where Jo offered people, gave £10 or $10 to Lumos, and we figured out a way that we would, randomly select them And she flew 6 folks from around the world. This is an open secret. It's all on her Twitter or X account. She flew them from around the world to have dinner with her in London. And that was interesting for us to see the overwhelming response to that, which crashed our website a couple of times, as you might imagine. But speaks to your point about, she has a reach which we would never be able to have on our own. And it just so happens that Harry Potter fan base, and they weren't all Harry Potter fans, most of them were, I think, but that fan base is pretty truly global. And so that helps. I think that helps in terms of that reach and awareness, because what we then picked up from that, it wasn't more so than the funds. It was actually a growing awareness, thinking about, getting our message out, and going back to the conversation we were having a little while ago about, how do we raise awareness, inform change behaviors around people who are giving funding, well-intentioned, but actually propagating this issue in many countries around the world. Because one of the things that we and our partners have grappled with is it's hard to get a one-size-fits-all message and channel and messenger to change that, and to do it in a way which isn't patronizing by saying, do you know you're doing the wrong thing? That would be wrong. So the challenge we all face is, how we slowly, but maybe faster, share this information to raise awareness and ultimately change behavior. But having someone like Joe who has such enormous reach, etc., is only an advantage for us, whether on that or other issues.
I want to just move us on to talk a little bit more about partnerships, and we've touched on it already in terms of the amazing sort of deep partnerships that are involved in order for you to do the work that you do. Can you perhaps share a story that really sort of captures some of that essence of collaboration that forms a sort of part of your day-to-day work? So it's something that really sort of illustrates the power of partnership to bring about change and to ultimately help children.
Yeah, I think I'll go with governments, because that's so much of the core of our model. And we hear many stories, and I can speak to just one in Kenya, mainly because it's one of the countries I visited, so I'm a little bit more familiar with what's going on there. But we have quite an extraordinary partnership there with the national government, but with the authorities in one particular region. It's called Embu County. It's an eastern region of Kenya. And through our team in Kenya, and just as an aside, all of our staff in every country are local staff. We have no expatriate staff. Very much part of our model is that localization, local capacity building for the sustainability, et cetera, that I spoke to earlier. So we have a fabulous but small team in Kenya, and they have developed extraordinary relationships with the government of Kenya at the central level, but also the eastern region and in the county. And then with the appropriate partners and individuals at the local level, as well as some of the international partners who have maybe an office in Nairobi and a presence in Kenya. But it's a great question, because there's just been really significant investment in all of those partnerships. And then what's really exciting about Embu County is, and I've had a career in this space broadly. And so I've been to a lot of places. I've seen a lot of programs and projects and attempts to shift systems and everything else. I don't think I've ever seen anything that felt quite as co-owned between the authorities and ourselves and the other partners who were there, and the excitement and the energy they had. And we looked at different bits of the system and different bits of the support that they were giving to children, and some of the interventions where Lumos had used small amounts of money, maybe 50,000, 100,000. I say small in the grand scheme of things, not millions of pounds, but small amounts of money to unblock certain things as part of that systemic transformation. Other organizations doing something similar. But what was really exciting was, first of all, speaking to three things really. One was speaking to some of the local officials who themselves had come through the system and had managed to have an education and everything else, and were now giving back in a way by being part of a local authority, maybe a social worker or a child protection officer or something, working in the system. I had some really, really compelling stories from a couple of people who had come that route. And another was a young man who had grown up for some of his childhood in an orphanage, came out of the orphanage, really then realized all that he had been missing and became very evangelical about it. But how that got him into trouble with his family and the community, because family, friends and neighbors, etc., worked in the orphanages or part of the supply of that, and they thought it was a good thing. And therefore they thought that he shouldn't have been sort of coming out and saying, challenging what was going on and trying. So it was interesting to hear that micro level in that community, how he was in a fairly sophisticated way trying to educate his own community, which is another part of how we go about this, because it should never be for organizations like Lumos to go into a country and tell people how to do things. And so you've got those voices of lived experience internally really powerful. And then the third aspect I would share there was, when we went back up to Nairobi a couple of days later and met with the senior officials, ministers in government, it was that genuine understanding and level of detail they had about what was going on in that county, how excited they were by it. And I was there in January. The pilot is nowhere near finished, but they're so excited about how fast the progress is that the Kenyan government is now taking that and starting to replicate that in the Rift Valley region of Kenya, where there's another large number of children in orphanages and institutions. And so to see their passion and commitment, a few hundred miles or however far it was from where we had been a couple of days previously in this county in the eastern region, and to see those bits of the different bits of the system and to understand they've all got to work. You've got to have them all moving. And then, hats off to our team. We have a fabulous, fabulous team in Kenya, and the sophisticated way, and it goes back to something you said earlier, Piers, about diplomacy. It's sort of diplomacy with technical street smarts about how you network, who you need to be networking with, and how you're having diplomacy, how you're nudging and supporting and helping multiple actors in that whole system simultaneously in order for the change to happen. It is complex.
Howard, just going into your experience and your understanding in the round, both in the UK and the US, when it comes to social impact and causes and organisations, foundations, what do you think are the main differences between the US and the UK, and what can we kind of learn from each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm glad you asked it like that, not just is one better than the other, but what can we learn from each other? Because I think there are definitely things. And it's interesting, actually, also just that having sat on boards of nonprofits, both in the UK and the US, that's one big difference, is that boards tend to be, in the UK, tend to be more focused on strategy and fiduciary oversight, under the regulations of the Charity Commission and etc. And that's right and proper. Many non-profit boards in the US are very much about fundraising. And that means you build the boards differently. They have different expertise and networks, different expectations. And then the board meetings themselves are inevitably very different. So that's one difference. Staying on the money for a moment, I think in the US, people do give more. I think, rounding up or rounding down, I think in the US, the last figures I saw were the average is people are giving around 2% of their income to charitable causes. In the UK, I believe it's about 1%. You probably know that better than me and will correct me. But if the US is giving, twice as much, it's also doing twice as much from incomes which are 50% higher on average than the UK. So that the quantum is bigger. There are many more nonprofits, of course, but then you've also got maybe it's outliers, but actually there are so many very large philanthropic endeavors in the US. There's some of the major global foundations, partly because of some of the money that's come through certain industries, corporates, the tech sector in over the last 20, 30 years. Huge amounts of money. So there's different in terms of financing. I think there's different in terms of, in the US, the understanding. And look, I'm not an expert on US nonprofits and philanthropy. I just want to put that out there. From what I know from living in the US for most of the last 10 years, I also know that I think there's a different kind of appreciation of the complexity of nonprofit work. As we've been talking about, that, it's not rattling a tin here to get some coins, to buy a blanket, to take someone. That happens and that matters and it makes a difference for that person's life, for sure. But when you're in the business of complex systems change, when you're working in difficult environments, conflict environments, with all the change and turmoil we have going on, in the world right now, most nonprofits, I would hazard a guess, whether they're working internationally or even in the UK, it's complex. So in the US, I always felt there was a slightly different, a bigger understanding of the complexity of non-profit work, and that plays out in different ways. It plays out, the UK fairly regularly. You'll see in the tabloids, it'll rank, salaries of charity leaders. It'll tell you who's earning more than the prime minister or something. And we're very caught up on that. And maybe that's a broader cultural issue. In the US, and I'm not saying we should necessarily earn more here, but I am saying in the US, you don't have those debates. Nonprofit leaders are not spending time and energy on defending why they have some really qualified people in their team, and therefore they earn a decent salary, because the work they're doing is really complex. So there's a sort of, it sort of bleeds across into a range of issues, I think, of running a US nonprofit. And then I think the risk appetite is a bit different in the US. Maybe that speaks to some of the quantum of finance. Again, maybe that's a broader issue that's not just in the charity sector, it's probably across the corporate sector and beyond, which is an appetite for risk, an appetite for pace, and an appetite, an expectation that you'll get some things wrong. But if you acknowledge them and learn for them and don't cover them up, that can be healthy. But as I say, I'm really oversimplifying from the limited experience I had, or what I observed from both being in nonprofits in the US, but also living there for most of the last 10 years. I think why I like your question though, Piers, because what can be learned the other way? Because I do think that UK charities are well run comparatively. When I, for me, entering the system here, and all the regulations we have from the Charity Commission, but also the support we get from the Charity Commission. And those of us also who are registered with Companies House, there are expectations that we must meet. But there are also some great trustees. We have a board of 10 or 11 people in Lumos in the UK. And I constantly have to remind myself and my team, these guys are giving up their time voluntarily. They're giving up significant amounts of time over a given month, quarter, or year to really not just oversee us in that kind of performative way, but really to be thought partners with us, to challenge us, to celebrate with us, but also to be there for us and make sure that we're doing the right things in the right way. So, I think that, yes, you have people giving their time to nonprofits in the US, but it's a lot more about the generation of funding, etc., which I think in the UK, the people we tend to work with, is a lot more about strategic insights, as well as some of the many issues across people, finance, risk, technology, cybersecurity, which we have that kind of expertise on our board as well. So definitely lessons both ways. And I would never want to paint it as one better than the other, both different. And I think interesting, we were talking earlier that some things are fluid. I think this is a fluid space as well. Obviously, legislation changes. A lot of nonprofits in the UK, well, all of us were hit earlier this year or last year with the changes in national insurance. Well, all organizations were hit. So you have to be sort of eyes open as to what legislative changes might happen. I know that there are some US organizations right now who are choosing to offshore some of their financing because they are concerned that there might be changes to tax arrangements for certain charitable giving in the US under the current administration. So both sets are having those issues about, you've always got to be understanding where your government is, where their heads are, where the ideology is, where it might be going, and what that might mean for your sector as well.
It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a couple questions just to finish off, and maybe stay in the UK for the moment. For other charity leaders listening, maybe those who are also whose charities and organisations are tackling big systemic change or have big ambitions to, what lessons would you share, or what advice would you give to them about sort of sustaining change and momentum over the long haul? What would you say?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. I think first of all, personally, but then almost certainly organizationally, know what your values are. Because at the moment, and anything I've said today that was definitive, then that should be edited out, because anyone who makes definitive claims about what's going to happen next or what will happen next, no one knows. And that's partly because so many things are changing and there are interdependencies, and no one really knows how things are going to play out on different ways. And so I think that, if you know what your values are, though, as an individual, as a leader, and if your organization, has a good set of the right values, but actually they are being lived out by that organization, and therefore your organizational culture is healthy. And this is easier to say than do. And this takes, every action you do, everything you say, every email you write, every look you make, it all matters. You're sending those signals the whole time as a leader. So yes, you have the policies and the values on the wall and this, that, and the other, and you have training, and that really matters. But actually how you show up as a leader, but you can only really do that in a sustainable way, in the right way, I believe, if you know what your personal values are and where those red lines are, but also if you know what your organizational values are and you are collectively trying to pull in the same direction, recognizing that sometimes you're going to get it wrong individually and collectively, and that you're going to acknowledge that it's going to be safe to do so, and you move on. So that's one thing I say. The values really matter, because, absent a map of where we're all headed, then the values maybe give you a bit of a compass. Does that metaphor work? I don't know. Anyway, the values give you a bit of a compass in the absence of a map. The second thing I'd say is around, recognizing that it is a painful moment we're in. A lot of organizations have lost a lot of money. They've lost a lot of people. Some organizations have gone under. And I'm talking both in the UK, but internationally too, over the last year or so, maybe since the pandemic, but certainly the last year for sure. And I think it's, network with your peers. Because the danger is that you get into competition with your peers, either for thought leadership or because that thought leadership and proof of impact might lead to more money, because you are at some point competing, from some of the same pots, but finding the way to both recognize that honestly and openly with your peers, figure out how you as an organization, differentiate yourself in the market. But I think those peer networks, because going back to the earlier conversation about the complexity of nonprofit work, and the challenges and the multiple pressures on most CEOs in this space, really only other CEOs will fully understand without you having to open your mouth for what you're going through. And therefore, I find it very helpful network. And the third thing, I guess, is just that, just being open to thinking about doing things quite differently to how we may have ever done them before. And I don't mean change for change's sake. And that's not an importation of sort of, move fast and break things from sort of Silicon Valley a few years ago. It's more, so much is in change. And we're trying to figure out on a daily basis what it means, but how we deliver something over weeks, months, and years, while knowing that change will happen as we go. So I guess being agile and adaptive, but recognizing that so much is changing. We don't know exactly where we're going to end up or what the pathways there will be, but being open to change and adapt. And that really, for me, has always been about, and certainly is now, making sure I'm surrounded both internally, but externally, whether it's my peers or people in unrelated fields, being challenged by thinking that's going on elsewhere. I have friends across sectors, government, corporate sector, faith, etc. And it's really interesting listening to them about, well, what are you doing about cybersecurity threat? Or what are you doing about deploying AI programmatically or for efficiencies? Or, and just learning from some of those things. What are you doing about the regulations that came in a couple of years? There's so much you can and should be learning from both internally but externally. So they're the three things I would say.
And finally, Howard, just wanted to ask, what does the Lumos Foundation hope for in the next 10 years? What's your biggest hope for the children that you're out there to try and change the lives for?
Yeah, I hope that we will see a lot more children who are in institutions and orphanages. In 10 years' time, that number has gone down, because the number, as you know, is about between 5 and 6 million. The data's questionable. It's large. I hope that number is significantly smaller. Whether that's down to 3 or 2 or 1, we want to get that down as low as we can. And we is the collective we. And so if we can get that number down, and if we can, successfully have that support built around families and in communities to support families so children can stay in and thrive in safe and loving families, then we're going to see large numbers of children having the childhood they deserve, but a much better childhood that they should be having anyway. So if we can see that, and from a Lumos perspective, if we can play a small part in making that happen, if we can discern where do we have something to add and where do we just need to get out of the way? Because I think so much is changing so fast. There'll be some places we say, you know what? We have a very specific time-bound intervention or support of some sort, but otherwise, get out of the way. We don't need to be everywhere. And so really discerning where can we play our part for that much bigger children's agenda.
Howard, if we're still around in 10 years' time, you're going to have to come back and tell us whether we've got there. I'd be fascinated to find out. But Howard, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much. Over the last few weeks, we've been giving some airtime to small charities, the ones you don't always hear about, but who are doing brilliant work in their communities day after day. They're often running on tiny teams and tight budgets, but they're tackling big challenges and making real change happen. And because they rarely get much of a platform, we want to help share a few more of those stories. So if you're involved in a small charity, or you know one that really deserves a bit of recognition, do get in touch. You can email us at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or use the link in the show notes. Tell us who you are, who you support, and what would genuinely make a difference right now. We'll do our best to bring those voices to the show. Right then, Piers, who have we got this week?
I love this nomination, this charity that Kirsty Corbett has got in touch with us about to champion. It's a really, really life-affirming charity ambition, I think, with a really lovely goal. So it's the Be Bold, Be You Foundation. And after 2 years, Kirsty has said to us, after relentless applications, they've finally received their charitable status last year. Now, the Be Bold, Be You Foundation are the only charity of its kind in the UK, she says. They support those affected by cancer and precancerous cells by gifting them a professional photo shoot designed to instill confidence and reignite a sense of identity. And we know this all too well, I think, Tim, in the people that we've had on this show, and obviously personally at the Brain Tumour Charity, that often treatments for cancer and cancer diseases can cause lots and lots of psychological and physical changes. All the usual things that you see from hair loss to everything else that goes with the treatment for so many different things. So gifting this professional photo shoot is just a real mental boost, I think, and a really lovely thing to do. So that's the Be Bold, Be You Foundation. Huge thank you to Kirsty for nominating that this time.
Great charity. It reminds me a little bit of Super Shoes. Do you remember them from one of our very early episodes? Charity that gifts shoes to children who have cancer. I think that's a lovely touch. Those kind of things that go beyond the supporting people with the actual condition or what it is they're going through, but giving them an experience or a gift that makes a difference to them emotionally. So I think that's really important. Coming
to that experience and coming at that kind of from a left field angle, but it's such a vital and such a rewarding thing to be able to give people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also heard this week from Lorraine Wilson, who told us about Millie's Smiles. Now, Millie's Smiles is a small children's cancer charity with a large national presence. And Lorraine told us that it's been set up in memory of Millie, who sadly passed away aged 11 with acute myeloid leukemia. The charity supports families and children right at the point of that initial diagnosis and admittance onto an oncology ward at one of the main treatment hospitals. Millie's Smiles provides a Millie bag, at admission containing all the essential items that parents will need during an unplanned, unexpected hospital admission. The bag also contains luxury comfort items. Our Millie bag, says Lorraine, is more than just a bag. It tells parents during one of the most frightening times of their lives that someone cares about that and is thinking about them at that time. What another lovely organisation doing some amazing work and giving those special gifts that do make a difference. So thank you, Lorraine. Lovely to hear from you. And we'll put the links to both organisations in the show notes.
2 more brilliant small charities this week making a huge difference. And don't forget, if there's a small charity you think we should feature, drop us a line at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or head to the link in the show notes to nominate them.
And that's a wrap for episode 39. A big thank you to Howard Taylor for opening our eyes to the reality of life in orphanages for children across the world.
Yeah, it was a fascinating insight, that. And we've got lots more where that came from too, haven't we, Tim?
Absolutely, but of course we're taking a break for a few weeks for Christmas. We'll be back on the 5th of January with lots more, including we'll be taking a closer look at your world, Piers, celebrities and charities. So look forward to that in the new year.
Yeah, always a fascinating topic. And as you say, Tim, my bread and butter over the Brain Tumour Charity. Interesting to see how the fast changing world actually of influencers and celebrities and charities all work together. So make sure you follow us on your usual podcast platform to make sure that you don't miss it.
And while you're there, of course, please give us a quick 5-star rating. It really helps others in the sector to find the podcast.
Thanks for listening. Have a great Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll see you in January.